Today's show is brought to you by Vasion. You know print is one of the biggest drains on IT resources, but did you know there's an easy solution? Just eliminate print servers. They're resource intensive and likely the bane of your IT team's existence. Vasion Print, formerly known as Printer Logic, lets you simplify infrastructure and maximize resources by replacing print servers with direct IP serverless print. Reduce attack surfaces and secure your environment while still enjoying cloud-native flexibility that easily supports a hybrid workforce. Less complexity, less headaches, and less time wasted. And with built-in AI and automations, it's a solution that just works. See for yourself by scheduling a demo at vasion.com. That's VASION.com.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Hey everybody, it's Brian. Aaron and I are both traveling this week, as tends to happen sometimes in the summer when trade shows are going on. But wanted to let you know we've got a great show this week. Aaron does an awesome interview with Joel from Vue and really digs into kind of some topics around data and AI, something that I think we are still ourselves always trying to wrap our head around, sort of the complexities of data, and especially as we're now starting to get it in AI, just, what all are the things that need to happen in order to make it simpler for teams that are trying to build AI applications, trying to build AI experiences? What do they need to do to make sure that the data that they're putting into their systems is clean, is fast, is able to be managed, is able to be adapted? And so Aaron will dig into that. So the massive Cloudcast studio is still alive and well. Aaron was absolutely recording from that, and we will get to that in just a bit. Is Microsoft Unified Support busting your IT budget? Well, you're not alone. US Cloud is the global leader in third-party Microsoft enterprise support, and they're helping enterprises slash cost by 30 to 50% versus Microsoft Unified, all while getting faster response times from domestic engineers. No offshoring, no long waits, just expert support you can count on 24/7, 365. Trusted by 50 of the Fortune 500 companies and offering senior-level engineers with an average of 14 years experience with Microsoft technologies, US Cloud is the smarter alternative for premium Microsoft support without the premium price. Ready to make the switch? Book a call at uscloud.com to get started today. That's uscloud.com.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. We have a concept I feel like we're going to dig into, and with something we've talked about many times on the show in many different ways, and that being data. But I feel like there's something more here. There's something we need to dig into. And so we're going to dig into this concept of universal data representation for AI and exactly what that means. And for that, we have Joel Christner, founder and CEO at Vue. Joel, welcome to the show, and give everyone a quick introduction, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Aaron, thanks for having me, and to all of your listeners, thanks for tuning in. My name is Joel Christner. I've been in tech for just about 30 years, did a long run at big companies like Cisco and Dell, did a bunch of startups, and here we are at Vue, making it easy for enterprises to take advantage of artificial intelligence. So my role in the company is keep the wheels on the bus, keep the lights on, and build the core of the product. And we're getting some good traction and good success. So I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. So yeah, as I mentioned, our big topic today is kind of everything data, right? And how to represent it, how to embed it into AI systems. Because I feel like there's a lot of folks out there, it's like, oh, I have a model and I just fine tune it, or I just train it, or I just set up a RAG pipeline. But a lot of people don't quite understand what that exactly entails, right? And so let's first of all kind of start at the challenge. Like, what is the challenge of data, structured, unstructured in most organizations today? And what is behind this concept of universal data representation?
That is a fantastic question. And I think a lot of people do start their AI journey perhaps a little prematurely because they don't have what I would call a solid, horizontally applicable data management layer in place. And there's a lot that goes into that. There's governance, there's provenance, there's lineage, having an understanding of where your data is, the way that it's structured, who's authoring this data, how it needs to be secured. That's all, part and parcel of a core data management system. And the better prepared you are in that endeavor, the better you're going to be when it comes to deploying AI. Data for data management's sake is very different than data for AI systems. With AI systems, there's obviously the training and the fine-tuning that can go into a model. I think the vast majority of companies out there, when I say vast majority, there's a lot of little companies, right? Not everybody has the resources, the people, the knowledge, the time, the money to go out and train and build their own models and fine-tune them. So the vast majority of people are going to be using off-the-shelf models. And that brings up the next question. How do I take advantage of that model using my own data? And a lot of people think that it's very easy. I'm just going to, drag and drop a file into my model and do RAG, and that'll only get you so far. What we found is that the best approach, or one of the best approaches, there's several, and you'll want to use multiple, right? This is just one of them, is building out a metadata and feature store that looks at the contents of your data, understands what the type of the data is, extracts the geometry of that data, the key terms. If there's any kind of schema in that data, identifies the schema and then flattens the representation into something queryable, understands the data types that are in the various values, and builds an inverted index so that you can see how the subcontents of that file relate to other subcontents. Like if I have the sentence, the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog, I'd want to know that the word "the" is at positions 0 and 6, and it's 3 tokens away from quick, or whatever the case may be. That's what we call universal data representation at View. That's one of the fundamental things that we do. It's kind of our secret sauce, where we can take any heterogeneous piece of data and transform it into this homogeneous representation. So it has the same structure, whether it's a database table or if it's a JSON object or the contents of a PowerPoint file. Once you have that puts you then in a position to begin intelligently embedding using an embedding model of your choosing. And the resultant embeddings can then be packed into a vector database along with metadata and the contents that can then be a feed to your retrieval augmented generation pipeline. So what that will allow you to do is, if you have something that sits in between the user and the model that is able to then query that metadata feature store to find relevant contextual documents, that prompt can then be packed and fed to the model with context, allowing the LLM to give a more intelligent, data-centric response rather than just what it's been trained on. So I said a lot. I'll pause there, Aaron, and give you an opportunity to ask any clarifying questions on that.
Well, yeah, maybe one, because I think it's worth touching on again or clarifying maybe a little bit more. I mean, the most prevalent solution I'm seeing in customers I speak to is exactly what you were saying, like taking a foundational model or a frontier model, however we want to call those these days, and then simply adding a RAG pipeline to it in most cases. I don't see a lot of organizations necessarily taking the time to fine tune as much. It's hard to put a number on it, but 80-20, 90-10, somewhere thereabouts. But I think the amount of organizations taking the time or having the staff or having the resources or, the amount of GPUs to do fine tuning, I'm just not seeing that as much. But I wanted to clarify, is that what you're seeing as well when it comes to this data representation? It's mainly RAG pipelines and vector databases, or is that maybe a little bit off?
I'd say that is the overwhelming majority. And the primary reason for it is, even though OpenAI launched ChatGPT in November 2022, so two and a half years ago, the learning curve, especially as it relates to training networks and building models, the learning curve is still pretty steep, even though there is just a tremendous amount of information out there. Especially when you start talking about engineers in the enterprise, right? They've got a day job, and since there's not a measurable ROI that someone could just apply to a potential AI project to say, we know that if we embark on this journey, we're going to cut customer support costs by 30%, right? So it's very hard to tie a dollar amount to that. It's very difficult to create then an incentive for someone to go off and learn it if they don't know that they're going to get the ROI out of the project, because 30% of somebody's time is 12, 13 hours a week, something like that they could be doing what they're supposed to be doing. So there's a time commitment certainly to doing it. There's a risk associated with it. So I think what a lot of people have opted for is just taking advantage of RAG, because it's not a perfect solution by any means, and certainly there's a lot more that you can do with training your own models and fine tuning existing models. But there is one part science and one part voodoo in RAG, in that
sure,
the better you're able to parse and dissect your data into features, and the better you are able to tune the way that you retrieve data and compact that into a useful prompt for the model, you can get extremely good levels of accuracy, right? We're seeing customers get north of 92% accuracy just using RAG and an off-the-shelf foundational model, whether it's like Quinn or Llama or something along these lines.
Yeah. And a follow-up question to that too, because I want to understand too, what we're really talking about here when we talk about this kind of universal data representation, at the end of the day, okay, whether it's structured data or unstructured data or a combination of both, what we're looking at here is tooling and a workflow and a pipeline that is taking those files that are, I'll say, customer specific or organization specific, and then running them through this pipeline and this set of tools, with the output being the embeddings that would go in a RAG database, like a Chroma or a Pinecone or something else like that. Is that a correct way to kind of think about this workflow of like how it gets from, say, a PDF that is customer specific into something that, hey, I can write a prompt and it will actually spit out an answer based off of that? Is that a correct way to think about it?
Yeah, that's definitely the right way to think about it. So if your starting point is a PDF, the first thing you're going to do is detect that it is a PDF. Somebody could send you a Word document that's been renamed to .pptx, and all of your parsers are just going to explode. So you want to figure out what it is. Second is you want to extract key terms, top terms, general metadata out of the document. If it's structured, get the schema. From there, you want to take that source content and break it into what we like to call semantic cells. Those cells are contextually relevant pieces of the document. So if you're looking at a PDF, you might take paragraph 1 as a cell and then paragraph 2 as a cell. You want to then intelligently chunk it in accordance with your embedding model's boundaries. It might only accept a certain number of tokens. So maybe that's 256. So you chunk it 256 tokens at a time from each semantic cell, thus yielding semantic chunks. And there's a lot of wizardry you can do in there too. You might want some overlap amongst those chunks. That way you're not losing contextual pieces as you chunk. From there, and of course that's a space versus fidelity trade-off, right? From there, you generate embeddings against that content using the embedding model you specify, and that plus, in our case, a whole lot of other metadata gets fed into a vector store. One that we absolutely love is PG Vector, and the community's been gravitating toward it quite a bit. One of the interesting things that you can do when you have something that is like the UDR concept that I described, you can also create hierarchical metadata retrieval capabilities inside of your RAG pipeline. So you're no longer confined to just doing cosine distance searches or Euclidean distance searches or inner product searches to find contextual data that's been embedded that matches or is close to what your prompt contains. You can also start looking at other sources like your metadata and perhaps even graph representations. Maybe once you've gone through that fine-grained metadata extraction, you understand who the author is. And you might be able to identify other documents that have been written by that author that you might want to include as context because perhaps that person is a domain expert in that subject. So once you have that content embedded, the baseline is doing a distance or a similarity search or an inner product search against your vector store, but you can further augment it using that rich metadata that you've generated.
Fantastic. And a follow-on question, while I was thinking through some of these workflows, I think something else that comes to mind too is not just data quality and data representation, but this concept of data privacy. But I almost feel like that's too generic of a term. Let me give you an example. Like a highly regulated industry, like take healthcare or financial services or somebody like that, who maybe they want to do an off-the-shelf model, but they want to set up a RAG pipeline against it because at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of customer-specific data, PII data, other things like that. Or it's highly sensitive in the fact that like a lot of organizations, when I talk to them, they're not even considering public cloud for something like this, for, serving the data, serving the models, et cetera. And so how does that fit in of like, do you sometimes have like the RAG pipeline and the data be on-prem, but it's utilizing cloud services to actually generate the text? Or what kind of things are you seeing when it comes to highly regulated spaces or areas where that data really is like the keys to the kingdom, if I use that term?
Aaron, that's a great question. And it's a tough one because all of this AI stuff, I like to say, was really built for a born in the cloud native developer. And the majority of us have been conditioned to assume that when we're doing anything AI, we're going to be using a third-party public cloud API to do certain aspects of that. Fact of the matter is you don't have to. And there's nothing wrong with using that as long as you're safe and using your data in a way that is appropriate given the sensitivity of the data. A lot of the customers that we talk to are, the mid to high end of the enterprise. And the vast majority of their data is still behind the firewall because it's confidential, it's protected by regulation, there's company policy, there's intellectual property, there's financials, there's a number of, not to mention, I mentioned, regulatory, but like HIPAA and others. Good luck getting that data. And then not to mention just the general fear that whoever you send that data to might use it in subsequent training, right? Or they might get compromised. It's highly unlikely, but they could. So there are a lot of businesses that want to do everything end to end behind the firewall. The beauty is there's essentially tools that allow you to do just that. And shameless plug, of course, that's my company's bread and butter. We deploy in 15 minutes and you chat with your data inside of 20 once you deploy on a Linux machine behind your firewall. It is literally all enabled by a lot of open source software and, of course, bespoke software that we've built that runs on premises behind the firewall, and you can take advantage of any model from the internet. The difference is you're not having the conversation against that model on somebody else's server. You're actually pulling that model down to your data center and doing all of your embedding and inference and completions locally. So the tooling absolutely does exist. There's definitely an appetite for it. At least that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And let me kind of ask maybe a follow-on, because I love to explore life cycles of all of these. So let me give you another example. So first model comes out, right? You've got everything set up, you've got your embeddings, everything's working. And I'll just go back to the old, application terms. It's 1.0 of the model, right? And a topic we've explored many times on this show is a lot of organizations, there's two ways to handle the data model. And I'll just refer to the drift over time, right? Like you can constantly add more embeddings in, you can constantly add more data, you can improve the quality of it, but there's two theories to that. Number one is you take that 1.0 model and you just continually improve it. It's always a 1.0 model. I'll call it the ChatGPT model, right? Like even though there's ChatGPT 4, the answers you get, a couple months ago versus now, like, hey, sometimes the answers are different and you don't know why, right? And is it just the quality changed? Is it the data set changed? And so what I've seen, especially again, going back to highly regulated spaces, is almost this versioning of the data set and the model. I'm going to have this model with this version of the database, and we're going to call it 1.0. And then eventually we're going to roll out 1.1, which is going to be an improvement. But it's almost like a versioning and control aspect. And so like, what are you seeing? And what is your recommendations on how to handle this over time? Of course, we want continuous feedback and a continuous improvement, but how do you handle that unpredictability that some organizations would require?
Yeah, great question. So, thankfully there are a lot of, I hate to call them standardized, but there are standardized assessments that models can be evaluated against to give an indicator of their level of accuracy, just being able to answer questions. I think from an enterprise perspective, if you're using a model that is outside of your control, you need a studio of sorts that will allow you to connect a model to one or many different data stores. And those data stores have all of the contextual metadata and embeddings that have been generated against that data so that you can test how the model will handle certain types of questions and certain types of prompts. Within that studio, you should have the ability to modify and manage system prompts. So what you tell the model, give it some boundary conditions on how to respond, what personality to take on, what is in limits and what is off limits, and also the ability to make some adjustments to how retrieval is performed to enrich the prompt for retrieval augmented generation, of course. So if you wanted to restrict it to a certain number of entries and then pull the entire set of documents associated with those entries or just subsets of those documents or do some form of re-ranking, that kind of studio will allow you to quote unquote prototype or beta test an experience. The experience is at the end of the day what you're looking for, right? It's I want to put this thing out in the wild that is informed by this set of data and have, some reasonable understanding and expectation of how the experience is going to go for somebody who's asking it questions. A studio can provide you exactly that. You marry a model to one or more knowledge bases with retrieval parameters and system prompts. And once you dial that in, you can package that and then go deploy it, whatever you want to do. The beautiful thing about that is you can keep that same set of configuration and just replace the model with version 1.1 or 1.2, and then you can test it again and see what the changes look like. And if you like those changes, then you can go deploy the changes. So we've got a capability like that called our Assistant Studio built into the product, where I can marry a model to a set of retrieval parameters, to a set of knowledge bases, and bang on it and ask it all the questions that I want to see how it responds until you feel that it's behaving the way that you want and responding the way that you want. And once it is, deploy it on the intranet, deploy it to Slack, deploy it to Teams, put an SMS interface in front of it. And the nice thing about that is you can make changes over time too. And if you find one that works even better, you can replace it in place of the one you've already deployed behind the scenes with no disruption.
Nice. And let me ask you this, because I think this is really worth digging into as well. I think it's something that you hear, certain tools and certain technologies, whether it's the frontier models or, the kind of RAG database or some of these other things. I feel like we're starting to get to the point where I'll use, I don't want to say standards, because that's taking it too far and making it too official, but I will just simply say patterns are emerging as far as these are the certain tool sets and this is what it looks like, whether, take this kind of model, take this kind of RAG database, take this kind of tooling and kind of string it all together. To kind of go back to DevOps days, it's the equivalent of building, the CI/CD pipelines, and certain tools and patterns developed over time. Are we to the point where those patterns are starting to develop, where when you're talking to customers and they want to get going and they want to get going fast, you kind of say, okay, use this model, use this technology, use this tool. Here's how you string it all together. Because, oh, by the way, it's proven, it works. There's lots of other customers out there doing it today. What kind of recommendations do you have for something like that?
That's a great question. And you actually took it in a direction that I was not anticipating. I was thinking about it from the perspective of I remember when cloud was this new fandangled thing. And it only took, I would say, maybe 3 years before the API war on object storage was won by Amazon S3.
Yes, perfect example.
It became Absolutely. A de facto type of thing.
Yes.
A very similar type of thing has already happened, in my opinion, with the front end of prompting a model, and that's OpenAI's API, the data structures, response structures. We're starting to see some de facto. I call it de facto standards coming out through the likes of MCP is another example of that. But I think more to your question about the actual end user experience and the use case for that experience, that's a tough one to answer horizontally. Horizontally, it's easy enough to say, if you're going to do a customer support chatbot, you're going to be loading in all of your customer support tickets, your product manuals, troubleshooting guides, account-related types of things. I'm blending customer support and technical support here, so forgive me for that. I'm conflating.
No problem.
You've got a corpus of data, and then you you make sure that you include some overlap in your chunking strategy. That way, you don't chunk right in the middle of a thought that's important contextually. You want to try to capture every whole thought that you can, and then you build your system prompt to say, you are a helpful customer support chatbot provided for you. Before the user question is a series of helpful pieces of contextual information, and at the end you will also find links to those documents if you want to share those with the user. Respond in a friendly way. Don't answer questions that you don't know how to answer, and try not to lean on your training. Rely primarily on the provided context. I think it's hard to nail down a de facto out of that, but I think that, the world is starting to converge on what the best practice, for instance, system prompt is and chunking strategies are for various use cases like customer support, technical support,
yes.
Even, for some more complex domains. But where it gets really tough, and one of the reasons that I firmly feel that, it's difficult to get that solid horizontal data management strategy in place, and you'll see why I'm saying this in a second. Data and data management are extremely fragmented. The farther up the data stack you go, the more bespoke the data becomes. So it's good to have that generalized set of principles around chunking strategy and system prompts and retrieval optimizations and all of these other things. But again, the farther up the data stack you go, the more bespoke it becomes. So the more you have to really understand your data to be able to tune those things to get the experience that you want.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I love it. And actually, I think that's a good point for us to kind of end on for today. So Joel, if anyone out there is kind of interested in this, wants to ask you a question, wants to kind of dig in more, what's the best place for them to get started?
Absolutely. Just go over to view.io, view.io. Check us out. And if you have any questions, email me, Joel, Joel @view.io. I'm here for it. We've got a great team that's passionate about this stuff. We're constantly learning like everybody else is, and we can't wait to talk to them.
Fantastic. All right. Well, Joel, thank you very much for your time today. And everyone out there, thank you very much for listening this week. And if you enjoy the show, please, of course, tell a friend. If you can leave a review wherever you get your podcast, please leave us a review as well. And of course, we're always looking for feedback and ideas for guests as well. show@thecloudcast.net. On behalf of Brian and myself, thank you everyone for listening, and we will talk to everyone next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.